Okay, everyone, welcome back to our Parasha Insights. Note that this will be our final class before the secular New Year break, and we'll be back the week of January 10th is when we're coming back together for class, and look forward to seeing everyone then. But let's get down to learning. We're not only concluding the secular year, but also concluding the book of Genesis, Sefer Bereshit, and the story that began with the creation of humanity is ending with Israel. And ending with the children of Israel, Bnei Yisrael, literally what we call ourselves as a nation, Bnei Yisrael. We're addressing the Torah, the people who literally were Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, Israel being the name for Jacob, and Jacob on his deathbed is offering words of blessing to the children. These blessings in many ways are going to be reiterated later on in the Torah as Moshe signs off from the people, from his leadership of the people. But in the meantime, here we are, Jacob addressing his children. And I read recently, it's very interesting, that Jacob is a very straight talker. He says it like it is to his children. He calls them out for some of the things that they've done, not all of them, but this is in contrast to someone else. This is in contrast to Joseph, who does not call them out and who treats them very gently. And it's a very interesting thing, perhaps psychologically, to think about kind of what does one need to move on and to move past one's mistakes. The brothers encountered Joseph, but they never really hashed it out in a difficult way. It's only when Jacob comes along, and Jacob at the end of his life, and he says, Shimon HaLevi, you and your violence, and so on and so forth. Some of it is quite difficult. But let's jump right into the sources. Here we go. So I wanted really to focus on two of the children of Jacob. It's all given in poetic language, so we're going to struggle through this a little bit. And okay, here we go. Zevulun, lechof yamim yishkon. So Zevulun, and this translation on the left is the JPS 1917 translation. That's kind of, I think, the standard translation, or the default translation on this website of Sefaria for biblical translations. So Zevulun, that's the name, of course, of the tribe or of the son. Lechof yamim. So chof in modern Hebrew, chof is the beach, is the shore. Lechof yamim. So yamim, the plural of yam, which is sea. So he's going to go to the shores of the sea. Yishkon, he will dwell. V'hu lechof aniyot. He's going to again, the translation here is a haven, lechof, but a shore for ships. V'yarkato al Sidon. So yarkato, the Hebrew word yerech, can mean a flank. It can mean a thigh. It can mean an extreme or an extremity. It means basically the understanding is that yarkato, that he will reach all the way, meaning his people will reach all the way to Sidon. And we'll get, at the end, we'll get to another meaning of that word yerech, unless anyone wants to venture it right now. Okay, one logistic challenge with this verse is that if you look at any of the old maps of the tribal allocations in the land of Israel, and if you look at the description in the book of Joshua, of how they actually settle, where should Zevulun be? Based on this, where is Zevulun? You could put him in a city. What would be his capital city?
It'd be way north.
So, okay, sorry. So good. One little bit of context is that Sidon is going to be all the way up in today's Lebanon.
That's, yeah.
All the way up north. So you would expect him to be on the shore, and you would expect him to be in Haifa. And if you look at any of the old maps, they put Zevulun smack in the middle of the country, actually landlocked. So it's a very interesting that the actual border turns out to be a landlocked border, even though he's described as being by the seashore. So there's a ton of commentary and academic work that's done on this, that maybe what it means by the seashore is that he had access to the sea, that there were tributaries and rivers that were running in, and canals or whatever it is, that he could engage in you know, kind of the merchant life of the seafarers without actually being on the sea. Which sea is he on? Is he on the sea of what the ancients called Ginosar, the sea of the Kinneret, or is he on the Mediterranean Sea? Obviously for trade, a lot better to be on the Mediterranean than on the little Kinneret for the purposes of trade. But wherever he is, this is the blessing or the words that Jacob is giving, that Zvulun shall dwell by the seashore. He shall be a haven for ships. His flank he will extend all the way to Tzidon. And then Yisachar. And then we'll go to his brother. Yisachar. Chamor Garem. Oh, we'll go with the translation for this. He is a strong-boned ass. Rovetz bein hamishpatayim. He is crouching among the sheepfolds. I don't know if anyone has ever encountered the word sheepfolds before in your literary histories. I certainly have not, but he is protected in some way between, one can imagine the sheepfolds, as some of the commentaries say, describing a geological reality, that it's something kind of between the hills. Vayar menucha, kind of like the folds in a sheep's skin. Vayar menucha kitov. He saw how good rest was or security was. Veta'aretz ki na'ema, how pleasant is the country. Vayet shichmo lispol. He bends his shoulder to lisbol, for burden. Vayehi lamas oved. And he became a toiling oved, a toiling servant. Vayehi lamas oved. So you have these two brothers, Zvulun and Yisachar, who are mentioned one before the other, or one after the other, and our tradition, and more than any of the other two subsequent brothers who are mentioned adjacent to each other, our tradition connects the two of them and says there has to be a reason why Zvulun and then Yisachar. Why? Why is there? I mean, what's going to? There's a blatant question here that's going to bother all of the commentaries. Any thoughts as to the question, what the question might be? There's an anomaly here. There's something unusual. And it's not a detail, it's a big picture thing. And that is?
They're not, Rabbi, they're certainly not scholars.
Okay, so number one, they're not scholars. And where are we going to get to the scholarship? That's going to be in the rabbinic literature, where we're going to talk about how all of this is referring to scholarship, or at least Yisachar is going to be referring to scholarship, the second one. But the big question, yeah, go ahead.
Rabbi,
yeah,
those who read the material beforehand,
yeah,
see the answer right in the text that you provided.
Which is what?
Who's older than who? Usually you have to mention the older one first.
That's exactly it. And there are many Dvar Torah which are predicated on the order in which the tribes are presented and the order in which the children are presented. We know about Menashe and Ephraim. We know about Joseph's sons and how that little switcheroo was quite impactful. We know how important age order is in the ancient world, and we know how important it is because, keep in mind, the only reason we're here is because Jacob the father somehow managed to switch his own age order and jump ahead of his older brother Esav. So, the concept of age order, this is going to be a very significant, now at the end of his life, now he's switching around Yisachar and Zvulun. To be Zvulun and Yisachar, something's going on. Something's happening here. And what do we know about them, about the two of them? I would say in general terms, is that Zvulun, of course, is going to be next to the sea. Why is that important? Because the sea is used for trade. So Zvulun, we're going to understand more in the context of being a merchant. And Yisachar, remember the sheepfolds, the concept of domestic life. And we're also going to use the word rovetz, which means to crouch. It's something a little bit more settled. He's more connected to this word, haaretz, to the land. And Zvulun is more connected to this word, to yam, to the sea.
Rabbi, I kind of think sheepfolds might mean flock, like he's crouching amongst the flock.
I'm certainly eager to entertain that. Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. I'm not deeply familiar with the word, and there are many commentators. I mean, all of these words, because they're poetic, they give rise to lots of different interpretations. Okay, Rashi. Rashi says, what do we mean by this phrase, Lechof Yamim, that Zvulun is going to be on the seashore? Rashi says, V'hu yihiyeh matzui tadir al chof aniyot. He is going to be found frequently by all the ships, bimkom hanamel, the place of the port, right? Anyone who's visited Tel Aviv, you go to the namel, you go to the old port, to the port. I guess we have the old port here in Montreal. They just go to the port. And sha'aniyot, Meviot sham prakmatia, that the ships they import their prakmatia, merchandise. Shahaya Zvulun osek bit prakmatio, umamsi mazon l'shevet Yisachar, because Zvulun would engage in trade and would feed Yisachar, v'heim oskim b'Torah, and Yisachar would learn Torah. And then we have some proof verses also from Devarim, from Moshe's blessing. Zvulun yotzei b'prakmatia. Zvulun goes forward in trade, and Yisachar stays home. Who does this remind you of? This balance of the relationship. Who does it remind you of?
Jacob and Esau.
Jacob and Esau. Exactly. The issue with Jacob and Esau, and I don't know that I've seen anybody write this, but this is certainly something that occurs to me reading this, is that Jacob and Esau saw themselves, they had very different roles, but they saw themselves as being in competition with one another. And what Jacob is looking to repair here is say, yeah, we have different roles in life, but we can actually engage in a mutually beneficial arrangement. And that's going to be that Zvulun goes out and does the work, and Yisachar stays home and studies Torah. The word, I just wanted to make a parenthetical note. I don't know if it was in the sources that were sent out, if it made it to the sources that were sent out, but the dictionary of Professor Marcus Jastrow, which is a dictionary of words of the Talmud and of the Midrash, notes that pragmatia comes from the Greek word pragmatia. Pragmatia. So the idea that it's the kuf, this word pragmatia or pragmatia, it's just different pronunciations of the same word. The original Greek is going to have the gamma, so it's going to be pragmatia, business, ware, goods. And this is not unusual, obviously, in a trade environment, that the word for trade is going to be a loan word from another language. What we would call in Hebrew maybe meschar, or I'm sure there are a lot of great Hebrew words for trade and business, and esek, whatever you want to say, but the word that the rabbis are using in rabbinic literature is going to be a loan word from the Greek, which probably tells a lot about how they thought about trade in those days. Okay, so we have this relationship. Where is this coming from? Where is Rashi getting this from? This idea, and again, Rashi never makes anything out, rarely makes anything, comes up of his own opinion. Rashi is quoting Midrashim. That's Rashi's modus operandi. So where does Rashi get this from? Comes from the Midrash, and here it is as it's expressed in the Tanchuma, that and it's basically going to say the same thing that Rashi said. This is where Rashi got it. Why does Kadam Zvulun Yisachar? Why does Zvulun come before Yisachar? Because Yisachar was born first. Why? Because Zvulun osek b'pragmatia, because Zvulun would deal with business, and Yisachar osek b'Torah. Asu shutafut beinehem. The word shutafut is partnership. They created a partnership that the pragmatia of Zvulun will go to Yisachar, and and then all the quoting all of the verses. Shel ilmale Zvulun, were not for the guilt of Zvulun, were it not for the material support of Zvulun, lo asak Yisachar b'Torah. Yisachar could not study Torah. Umitoch shenityached Yisachar b'Torah, and because Yisachar dedicated himself to Torah, v'lo asak b'pragmatia, and he didn't engage in trade, v'lo haya lo amal b'davar acher, and he couldn't work in anything else, and therefore we have verses umibnei Yisachar yodevina la'itim. They developed a sense of scholarship, and where I want to get here is, okay, that's the source, that's the Midrash with all of its proof texts that basically says it interprets the words, the words of the blessing to Yisachar to referring to Torah. When it says that Yisachar, remember it said that he leaned he leaned his shoulder to carry the burden. What's the burden? Ula shel Torah. That's the yoke of Torah. Okay, that's halacha. That's what that was Yisachar's role. Yisachar's role was to study Torah. Zvulun's role was to do the work. And here comes in the Midrash Lekach Tov, here comes, it's stated quite powerfully. Sheyehei tagar v'yored basfinot umevis chora, that Zvulun was the tradesperson. Zvulun would go down in the ships and do all the things that he needed to do. Lefisha hamevino atain l'toch piv shel Yisachar sheyosek b'Torah, because he was the one who was feeding. Notein l'toch piv. He was putting in the mouth of Yisachar. Ilmalei Zvulun, were it not for the older brother Zvulun, ein Yisachar osek b'Torah. Yisachar could not engage in Torah. So what's being presented here is a very clear description of the relationship that exists between the material world and the spiritual world, and the clear understanding that the spiritual world cannot exist without material support. As the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says, ein kemach, ein Torah. If there's no flour, there's no Torah. You need to be fed. We need to keep the heat on in the synagogues and the study halls. We need the books. We need the people who are going to be teaching it. This all requires sustenance. And the scholars who are not earning need food on their table when they go home. They need to be able to pay their children's tuition. They need to be able to raise families just like anyone else. So this is the core of the relationship. We're going to see how this is taken in halacha even one step further, that it's not just a relationship of convenience, of being neighbors. It's not just a relationship of the haves and the have-nots, but it's a much more fundamental agreement. It's a partnership that's going to be developed in the sense of how Jewish law is going to take this relationship and apply it. Any questions before we go on to the halacha?
Can I ask a question? Hi, Rabbi.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, sorry, my internet's not working here very well. Okay, this might be a total tangent, but Moses' blessing, something about, because isn't there a blessing on Adonai Yishmor Tzeitcha U'Boacha? Is that anything that you Tzeitcha, because it mentioned that in the other verse there? Has that anything to do with this? No.
Oh, interesting. I mean, that's the end of the last verse of Psalm 121 is what you're quoting. I don't know, but the word latzeit, yitziah, can also mean an outcome that produces wealth or that produces some type of income. But I don't know of that. But it could be that there's a source that says that. I'm not certain.
Okay.
I haven't seen it.
Okay. Sorry. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, let's jump to halacha. The Shulchan Aruch Yoredea. This is Jewish law, codified Jewish law. It would take us, months to really talk about how we get here to Jewish law. There's a whole path of going from the verses of the Torah all the way to how we live life. But at a certain point in history, in Jewish history, halacha went from being a localized concept that was determined by, of course, Jewish tradition, but also determined by a tradition of the sages and of local questions that would be asked, into the books that we call the Shulchan Aruch, which is the foundation of our modern understanding of Jewish law. Shulchan Aruch, Rav Yosef Karo, and a bit later, a century later, Rav Moshe Isserlis in what today is Poland wrote glosses on this. Rav Yosef Karo writing in the land of Israel, from a Sephardic perspective, what we might call today, and the Ramah of Moshe Isserlis from an Ashkenazi perspective, but of course it doesn't always divide that cleanly. It's not always two sides in that easy way. But what he says, Kol Ish Yisrael, every Jewish, we'll translate person, but it means Jewish man, and that's a separate conversation because later on in something I didn't quote, he'll talk about women. in the context of Talmud Torah, but that's a separate topic. Kol ish Yisrael, every Jewish man, chayav b'Talmud Torah, is obligated to study Torah. Bein ani, whether they're poor, bein ashir, whether they're wealthy, bein shalem begufo, whether they are healthy, bein bal yisurim, or whether they're suffering physically, bein bachur, whether they're a young man, bein zaken, whether they're old, afilu ani machazer al ptachim, even if they're a poor person who has to resort to begging, afilu bal isha uvanim, even a family man, somebody who has family responsibilities, married, children, whoever it is, chayav likboa lo zman letalmud Torah bayom uvalayla, has to establish time to study Torah in the day and at night, as it says, as the verse says, v'higita bo yomam valayla, you shall study it day and night. We have a little note of the Hagaot Maimoni. We have a little addendum who says, by the way, ubid shat hadachak. Anyone know what that means? Shat hadachak?
The time.
Good. Sha'ah is time.
Time.
So, yeah.
The immediate time.
So dachak, lidchok would be to push, but shat hadchak means the pressure time in urgent circumstances. Basically, that would be an idiomatic expression for shat hadchak would be like if you can't, in abnormal circumstances. So yeah, you're supposed to study Torah every day and every night, but what happens if you can't? What happens if today was just a busy day and the day ran away from me? What happens if something came up? What happens if there was an emergency I had to deal with, but I have to study Torah? So what do? Ubishat hadchak, he said, afilu lo kara rak kriyat shma shachrit v'arvi, even if you say the Shema twice a day, lo yamushu mipicha karinam be. We could still apply this verse to you, that the Torah shall never leave your mouth, basically. So you fulfilled something. So the bare minimum is saying the Shema in the morning, saying the Shema at night. You fulfilled Talmud Torah. You fulfilled the obligation to study Torah. And then the Shulchan Aruch continues. But what about somebody who doesn't know anything? Somebody who doesn't know how to learn at all. Or if they have crazy, busy life, whatever, yaspik la'acherim halomdim, shall support, shall supply, shall provide for other people who are studying. You have to study. Each and every one of you have to study Torah. But if you can't, well, what happens if I have no knowledge? What happens if I'm illiterate? What happens if I simply, for whatever reason, cannot? Well, there's another way to do it. There's another way to fulfill the mitzvah of Torah study, and that is to provide for somebody else. And now here comes the radical statement, because this is all very common sense until now. Yeah, if you can't do it, get somebody else to do it. Fine. And now here comes the Ramah. Hagah, he says, that means kind of a side note. Hagah, here we go. Here's a note. Vatechashev lo ki'ilu lomed ba'atzmo. It shall be considered for him as if he himself learned it. Okay. There's other mitzvot. You can't do this, right? Think about classic mitzvah. That one of the classic examples is lulav and etrog. So it's Sukkos. I have to shake my lulav and etrog, but I'm too busy. So what do? I call my friend. I call somebody up on the phone, and I say, "Hey, Philip, I didn't have a chance to do lulav and etrog today. Would you mind taking care of it for me?" That's not the way mitzvahs work. You can't do that. But Torah study is different. And I want to ask you to think about why it's different. Why is there a unique concept within Torah study that somebody else can do it for me. And not only can do it, but it counts as if I've done that. And not only that, we have a further, it is very dramatic. V'yachol Adam. This is much more than just, people in society working together to support each other, to complement each other. This is that the people who are not doing it are getting credit for doing it. V'yachol Adam lahatnot im chavero. And you can even make a condition with your friend. Shehu yasok b'Torah, that your friend will engage in Torah study. V'hu yamsi lo parnasa, and the other one will give him the sustenance or the income. V'yachloki mo b'schar, and they're going to share the reward. They'll divide the reward in half. So you pay me to learn Torah. For the two of us, I'll get half of the reward and we're talking heavenly reward, and you'll get half of the reward. Aval im kvar asak b'Torah, but you can't, and what he's going to say is you can't purchase my reward from past Torah study. It has to be from here forward. Im asak b'Torah kvar, if he already engaged in Torah study, eni achol imkor lo chelko b'shvil mamon she'yitein lo. You can't sell that part to somebody else if it's already been studied. But from Torah study, by the way, I'm for your information, everybody, I do daf yomi. I'm going to do the daf, and tonight, sometime between 7:30 and 8:30, I'm going to be studying the daf. Anyone want to buy half of my reward for studying the daf yomi, for studying that page of Talmud? I'm willing to sell half a page to anyone, to the highest bidder. Talk amongst yourselves. So that's basically what's happening here, is that you could have two people entering into a formal, structured partnership. One pays, one studies, they both get reward. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And keep this in your mind for a moment, thinking about why Torah study has this unique feature of being able to share reward. And again, going back to, I can't, when I have the matzah at the Seder, I can't say, okay, half of the piece of this matzah, the reward for half of this piece is going to Sorrel. It's just not the way it works. I can't do that. I can't divvy up my reward in that way. Torah study is the one exception. Okay, it continues, and I just thought this was interesting, so I put it in, just the continuation of this halacha, that a person, Yomod Adam Torah v'achar kach yisa isha, you should study Torah and then get married. She'im yisa isha tchila, yefshar lo asek b'Torah me'achar sherei chaim b'tzavaro. The millstones are hanging around one's neck after they get married, and so therefore, get your intellectual work done first, and then go start a family, because the millstones around the neck. I don't even know what that means. I don't even want to know what that means. And a person can't live without getting married because it's too much. The Yetzer Hara is there. Yisa isha tchila, should marry a woman first, and then study Torah if it's absolutely impossible. Ad ematai chayav limod Torah, until when? When is your obligation finished? Ad yom moto, till the day of death. Every single day is obligated, regardless of what point in life one is. Okay. Then the next halacha is basically talks about how one structures Torah study, that you have to do a third in written Torah. I found this interesting, that you have to do shlish b'Torah shebichtav. So 1/3 has to be the written law. Dehainu ha'arba'a ve'esrim, which are 24 books of the Tanakh, right? That include Tanakh, is the acronym that stands for Torah, which refers to the 5 books of Moses. Nevi'im, which are the books of the prophets, which start with the book of Joshua and goes all the way to the minor prophets. And Ketuvim, which are the scriptures, which include all of the Megillot, which includes the book of Psalms, which includes the book of Proverbs, which includes the book of Chronicles, and so on. So those are altogether, there are 24 books between the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, and the scriptures. There are 24 books, so that's 1/3 of the time should be spent studying that. 1/3 b'Mishnah, which is the oral law and the Operush Torah Shebechtav, and the interpretations of the written law, and then 1/3 shlish, 1/3 betalmud, in Talmudic study, which is different than Mishnah. Talmudic study is the depth of thought, is shiavin v'yaskil, as a person understands and intellectualizes, internalizes, acharit davar me'reshito, the end of something from its beginning, meaning it's the process of in-depth thought. So 1/3 is studying Bible, 1/3 is studying what we call Mishnah, and 1/3 in Talmud, which would be more conceptual and more in-depth learning. Okay, and then it goes on, and there's a note here at the bottom that says, by the way, there are those who say that the Talmud Bavli, that the Babylonian Talmud embraces everything. It includes all of those, because you have verses from the Talmud, because you have Mishnah, and because you also have the in-depth components of the Talmud, what we would call the Gemara part, that a person can fulfill all 3/3 by virtue of studying the Talmud Bavli. Okay, so going back to we'll stop with that. Okay, so going back to the question, so what is unique about Torah study? Why is that going to be the exception to the rule? That its reward can be shared, that it has this unique component of I can engage someone else to study on my behalf. Any thoughts, Philip?
Yes, it seems to me that it's a self-serving statement by those who write the Talmud and the Parashim. That's what it looks to me.
You can't blame us for trying to raise money here and there. You know,
Well, I think that's what it is, because that's what provides. And the only objection that I have to that is that I think, and I don't know how you implement it, but the Iluim, or those who are really apt for Torah study and are really good at it and good at understanding and can communicate, I think it's legitimate. But I think that there are perhaps many who consider that they would be less able to earn a living, or less interested in working at earning a living, so they take advantage of the cover of this statement. And I don't think that's correct, but I don't know how to deal with it, Rabbi.
Okay, excellent points. And I hear, certainly a reflection of contemporary circumstances, whether wherever it might be in the world, but including Israel, may be reflected in those thoughts. You'll tell me if I'm reading something into it that I shouldn't be, but I think there is a contemporary component to that. But let's even to return to that. But thinking about the nature of Torah study, what is it about the nature of Torah study that allows one to divvy up? Like what's the driving thought here? What's at the core of this that makes Torah study unique amongst all mitzvot? That I can give you some of my reward, I can buy some of your reward, we can enter in an agreement. Why Torah study? I could offer a suggestion if you like, but I'd like to, if anyone, yeah.
Is it possible because the person studying would then share it with the person that it was paying for it? So at least something will get transferred? I don't.
Oh, okay, that's a great suggestion, that maybe something seeps through in this relationship. It's not always clearly divided, that one is only engaging in business and the other is only engaging in Torah study. Maybe there's going to be some seepage across, and that both will be spiritually uplifted. Yeah, that could be. Good. Yeah, Esther?
Maybe the person who hasn't got the time and wants to share and wants to get somebody else to study for him, by doing that, he has the incentive at least to want to study, but he's not doing it himself. So he's gaining, just because he has like somebody else would just not even bother to ask somebody to share, to do the studying for him. They just ignore it completely. This way, he has a little bit of a finger in the puddle, so to speak,
Good.
and gets
Good.
a little bit from it that way.
Good. So he's not completely removed from it. There's
And
something- yeah.
eventually, when he sees what he's getting in terms of the reward, maybe he'll walk a little further into the water and do it himself.
Okay, so maybe it's just a means to a larger end of
Yeah.
everyone studying Torah. It could be.
Possibly.
Okay, could be. Good. Michael?
To me, it kind of sounded like a marriage arrangement. I don't know if there's like an undertone of that to it. If you read it narrowly, like the man is supposed to read Torah, well, the other half is the woman, sort of. That's my
Could be that one is in the classic domestic division of labor. It could be that one is staying back and doing or taking care of the home, which would be the Torah study, and the other is going out and hunting and gathering and all of that. It could be. Could be. That's a good suggestion. Peter, were you going to say something? I think Peter's a little frozen for me. No.
How's that? Better?
Yeah.
Okay. Could it have something to do with the fact that through study of Torah, one begins to have an understanding of ethical behavior, of social ways of organizing communities, etc., that has a positive impact on everyone. And therefore, on the one hand, one of the two people is providing the sustenance, the material substance, and the other, the intellectual, cultural, and ethical substance.
Good.
And therefore, both are sharing.
Good, good. So I think, Peter, I think you were articulating along the lines I think that I was thinking as well, which always reassures me that I wasn't so off base. But I think
it shouldn't reassure you. I think you should be very, very nervous.
So I think this may be a misapplication of utilitarian philosophy, but the idea that has to be asked is there a benefit to the world at large by this act being done? And so going back to the lulav and etrog example, does it matter does the world care whether I shake my lulav and etrog? And the answer is no. It matters for me on a personal level in terms of my performance of the mitzvot. I might even suggest that it matters on a metaphysical level, that there's some benefit to me, to God maybe, to the Jewish people, but does it make a difference to the world whether one extra lulav is shaken or not, that I would have to? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But there's something about Torah study that if I don't study my portion of Torah, the world is impoverished. The world is that less of a rich place because it's lacking my portion. And therefore, if I can't do it myself, I have to make sure that Torah study gets out to the world. That I think, and I don't know if that's what you were getting at, Peter. I think I was hearing that in your remark, but that there's some benefit to Torah study that is not only related to me as a person, but that I am fulfilling on behalf of the universe. And that Torah needs to get out there. So I am therefore going to say, I can't study Torah. Peter, would you please accept this money and study on my behalf? I'll get half the reward, you'll get half of the reward, but I'll make sure that I at least have some portion in benefiting the world in this way. Eleanor.
I was thinking to liken it as to that little bit of sourdough that you keep going, so that even if you don't make the bread or eat the bread, at least somebody is keeping it going until you can.
Oh, nice. Very nice. I like that. Thank you. That's
Rabbi.
Yeah, Cheryl, go ahead.
I'm likening it a little to fundraising here. My beautiful father, bless him, would say always, that when he received an award one time, he said, it's as important to do the work as it is for people to recognize that the work has to be done.
Yeah.
Like maybe you don't have the time to do all that, get everything done for the fundraising, but you recognize that it has to be done. And the same benefit is that we have Tikkun Olam. So I can't do the Torah study, but I recognize that it has to be done.
Right, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right, and thank you for bringing Morty's legacy into this. That's very beautiful. I wanted to take just two further points, very quick points, going back to interpreting that verse. So go back to the verse Zvulun, right? This was the verse about Zvulun. So Zvulun will go to the seashore, he'll dwell by the seashore. He will be near all of the ships. He'll engage in business and trade. V'yarkato al tzidon. So we said that his flank, but the word yerech also is a thigh. Remember how Jacob was injured, right? So it's interesting that Jacob is now, but yerech Yaakov. That's where Jacob was hit by the angel, or by the man with whom he struggled. And now suddenly that word appears in the blessing to his son. And in Hebrew, the word yerech is also euphemistic. And it refers not to the thigh, but to the genitals, to the point where yotzei yerech in biblical language, that which emerges from the yerech, literally emerges from the thigh, the product of the thigh, and obviously not being the thigh, but in proximity to the thigh, that refers to descendants, are the product of the thigh. And so the Midrash is going to take that understanding of the phrase and say, what does it mean? V'yarkato al tzidon, that the thigh, that the progeny, that the descendants extended up to Sidon. So look at this Midrash. It's a fantastic Midrash. The Midrash, or I'm sorry, it's the Alshich. It's the commentary of the Alshich. He said, Hine haderech mima'etet peri v'rivia. Don't you know that traveling minimizes procreation? The statement is that, and the Torah talks about the obligations that the Talmud talks in the Tractate Ketubot, talks about the obligations that different professions have within the context of a marriage. How often does one have to have marital relations with one's spouse?
And they had sailors as being one of the designations. How frequently?
Exactly. So sailors are how frequently. Camel drivers, very infrequent because they're away from home quite often, so they don't put the same expectations on each profession. And so what the Alshich is saying, by the way, you should know that people who travel for a living don't procreate as often. It's simply they can't. Amar, and so therefore, what the verse says, Ki Zvulun l'chof yamim yishkon, Zvulun will dwell by the sea, and he won't rest because he's constantly going out to sail. He goes to the far distant places, to the ports, and he's always on the way, on the path. And therefore, and he's on the seaways, on the seaways. All this traveling means that he's not at home with great frequency, and therefore one might think that the families or the family size of the tribe of Zvulun would be smaller because the men are always away. And therefore, Zvulun will dwindle to non-existence because their birth rate will be so low. Im kol zeh yifreh v'yirbeh. He shall be fruitful and multiply. That's Jacob's blessing to him. Ad yihi yarchato al tzidon merov am. He's going to reach up to Sidon. What does that mean? Merov am, from the abundance of people. His population is going to explode to a certain point that he's going to need to expand all the way up to Tzidon. That's the commentary of the Alshich. Is you don't think that just because he travels, they're not going to have lots of kids. They're going to have lots of kids even though they travel. And then finally, wanted to close with this Midrash Agadah. And the Midrash says, amazing. It says, Zvulun mitra'em al midotav. Zvulun's going to start complaining. Ve'amar, and said, Ribono shel olam, master of the universe, le'achai, to my brothers, natata sadot ukramim. You gave sadot, from the word sadeh, you gave fields, the kramim from the word kerem, which is a vineyard. You give them the fields and the vineyards. Veli, but me, natata harim ugvarot. You gave, hills and valleys. It's difficult to grow things in hills and valleys. Much more difficult. La'achai natata aratzot. To my brothers, you gave land. Veli natata neharot v'yamim. But me, you gave rivers and seas. Amar lo HaKadosh. He's saying it's not fair. I have the lesser. And Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So God said to him, no, kulam tzrichim lecha. Everyone's going to need you al yedei chilazon shekonim, because they're going to need to buy. What's the chilazon? Chilazon is...
It's the blue dye that comes from the snail in
exactly.
the sea.
It's the snail that they use to produce the chilazon, the blue dye for the tzitzit, Jeffrey. Exactly. So everyone needs you. You have this product that the whole world needs. So be thankful that you have something to sell. You're sitting on a natural resource. Zvulun, God says to Zvulun. Amar Zvulun, so Zvulun says back, Ribon ha'olami, master of the universe. V'achai ba'im v'lokhim b'li adiyati. But the nature of being at sea is there are no borders at sea. My brothers can just come right in. They can sail right in and take all my stuff, can take my chilazon. It's not like having a field with boundaries that you can protect it, right? Ubli damim, and they don't have to pay for it. Without money, without my knowledge, they could just come and take these snails. What? Amar lo, so God says, Siman yehe masur biyadcha. I'm gonna give you a sign. I'm gonna designate something for you. Shekol mishe, he told me menu below damim, that anybody who takes from Zvulun without paying, Eino neheneh b'prakmatia shalo, will not benefit from their business dealings. Anyone who takes a natural resource without paying for it from Zvulun will not benefit from their business, from their financial dealings. That's the Midrash Agadah. That Zvulun was given this great opportunity to farm chilazon and to be of an essential nature to his brothers. And will be protected in a divine way. Will be protected from the brothers coming in and taking that resource. I wanted today to essentially explore this concept of the Yisachar Zvulun relationship, how you can start in the world of Midrash, how one can begin from the blessings of Jacob to his sons, and noticing a nuance in those blessings, that the order is a little bit off. And from that emerges layers upon layers of interpretation. Well, why is the order off? Well, it could be because it's trying to tell me something about Zvulun, that Zvulun is not lesser than Yisachar, but equal to Yisachar, because they have a relationship, because they have an agreement. What is the nature of that agreement? That he does this and he does that. What's the nature of that agreement? Then comes in Jewish law and says, actually, there's something much deeper there. This is a possible relationship that you can engage in anytime you want. And there's something unique about Torah study, which allows us to share the rewards in this way, and gives us as well a responsibility. Even those who don't study Torah have to engage in the maintenance of Torah study as a way of perpetuating these values in the world. All of this from Jacob's blessings, and that's where the world of Midrash takes us in a very beautiful way. Any questions or comments before we sign off for 2021?
Yeah, what was the nature of the agreement?
What's that?
What was the nature of the agreement between Issachar and Zevulun?
The nature of the agreement was that, as stated in the Shulchan Aruch that we looked at, that Yisachar...
I'm sorry, I just arrived from the hospital. I didn't see...
No worries. That Yisachar is the Torah scholar, and Zevulun is the worker, and Zevulun can pay Yisachar, meaning we can engage. Any two people can enter into a Yisachar-Zevulun partnership, and they can draw up a contract. And one person can say, I will give you, $20, $500, $1,000, $1 million, whatever it is, if you study Torah on my behalf, I will support you. You study Torah. I will continue to work and earn. You study Torah as long as I get half of your reward. And they would sign off on this. And in that way, both would fulfill their obligations to Torah study, even though one never opened a book and the other one never went out to work. But either way, they're both being fulfilled in their ways.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. I couldn't get home. Get back home.
Absolutely. But well, here, this kind of relationship, it's spoken of quite often. This is a very common thing to discuss. A Yisachar Zvulun. Are you in a Yisachar Zvulun partnership? It has a little bit of an expanded meaning, but it's a very familiar concept within the world of Torah study. Not often. I've never seen it actually applied in a direct way, but it's something that we understand that people have different roles in the world, and it doesn't mean that this person is lesser, this person is greater, but that there's a value for maintaining Torah study even when one can't engage in it on their own.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to thank you very, very much, as always, for this illuminating explanation of the parasha. But I also want to mention and say how well done the annual meeting was, Rabbi.
Oh, it was
Thank
wonderful.
you very much. And also thank you to Peter for your involvement and all others. And if you would pass it on, incredible on Zoom. And I thought it was done I got a very good feeling watching it and thereafter. So thank you to all who worked on it.
Wonderful. I will.
I agree.
Those wishes.
I agree.
Thank you.
So
Sue.
it was amazing.
Wonderful.
Really wonderful.
I will pass along.
I agree as well.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
It was very good.
Thank you, John.
Glad I got to the last class.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes.
So stay tuned. We'll send out an email as always before the class.
Okay.
The week of January 10th. So I guess we're talking January 14th, if that is the Thursday. And otherwise,
Okay.
everyone stay well, be well, stay healthy, and looking
You
forward to
too.
seeing you very soon. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Rabbi,
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Rabbi,
shalom.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Rabbi, I have a
Thank you.
question. Since I didn't get